Hello everyone, my name is Stonesy Boy and welcome back to Stonesy Reads. This is the final Stonesy Reads for this book. Didn't I tell you? 10 days later and this book will be done? Well, look at the dates. Is it 10 days later? I don't know, to be honest. But yeah, we are at the final or finale of this book. So yippee to that, you know? Anyways, y'all ready? Let's begin with this. Chapter 29, The Final Betrayal. The gate to the enclosure nearly gave way under Ugub's ferocious assault, but Grinchard leapt forward to block the brute's path and refused to yield. They put their shoulders against the gate and jammed the edge of their boot against the base of it, and even the massive piglins shoving against it was enough to give them more than a few inches. "Give me a hand here," Grinchard shouted to the others, who had been gaping at the great bravery and awe. "I can't hold this much longer on my own." Micah dropped Farnham and dashed over to add her strength to Grinchard's. Ugub smashed against the gate at the second time, and two people resisting the brute's effort both howled out in pain. What noise got Farnham moving again? He stood up and still wondered where his feet were and found them flapping around underneath his knees. Armed with that knowledge, he tottered over toward the gate and, rather than throwing himself, fell against it. Ugub hurled their bulk against their gate a third time, setting Farnham's teeth rattling. The zookeeper didn't see how this is going to end well. He thought that maybe he could dig an escape tunnel like he had before, but then he looked down at his hands. He didn't see the shovel there. He must have dropped it when Ugub tossed him aside. He remembered then about the tunnel he already dug out of the enclosure. He then staggered over toward it. When he reached it, though, he saw that it had been filled up with lava that had flowed from the lava-flooded pit. That way was sealed off for them, too. To Critten's frustration, the great Bungus had taken a bit of convincing just to get a massive piglin back up on their good foot. The injury they sustained from the lava pool still had them in agony, but if one thing burned even stronger than Bungus in the end of their leg was their desire for revenge. Once Kritten had managed to slap Bungus back to the consciousness, all the advisor needed to do was point the wounded giant in the right direction. "There they are," Kritten had whispered to Bungus. "Ugub is right there before you, wounded and distracted with their back to you. You'll never get a better chance to attack them. If you wait for them to be done with the overworlders, they'll be sure to finish you off at their leisure. They might not bother to dirty their hands with you. Just have the others roll you over into the lava instead." The prospect of getting revenge and avoiding the nasty death had prodded Bungus to push aside the horrible pain they were in, mount their retaliation against Ugub then and there. As Bungus lumbered over the last desperate shot, that Ugub Kritten stole away and disappeared into Farnham's home. From there, Farnham stood in the enclosure. He could see that Kritten hadn't been idle while Ugub had been chasing him down and trying to kill him. In fact, the advisor had spent most of the time doing something that might have seemed all that wise at the time, but now turned out to be vitally important: waking up Fungus. The great gigantic piglin with the burned-off leg had been crawling up behind Ugub the entire time the infuriated brute spent trying to smash down the gate. He was still a ways off, but the other piglin warriors had spotted their former leader by now, had taken snorting and grunting about it and raised the alarm. Pointing at Fungus and gaping at them, the supposed leader had risen from the dead. Ugub grabbed the gate in the enclosure at this point, and rather than trying to knock it over to Farnham's friends, seemed like they were about to tear it off its hinges. Just as they were starting to put their legs into it, though, the ruckus hubbub the other piglins were raising finally got Ugub's attention. They looked back to see Fungus lumbering at them. The sight of Fungus stumping their way toward them with a still smoking leg, armed with nothing more than sheer wrath and determination strong enough to overcome their agonizing injuries, shook Ugub. But the traitor wasn't about to hand back the leadership to the piglin invaders. Instead, Ugub let go of the gate, turned around, and squared off against the massive piglin they betrayed, ready to finish them off for good. Farnham rushed over to his friends, his head growing clear by the moment. They looked better than when he had left them before. "I got us patched up the best I could," Micah said. "Grinchard is tougher than they look." "As you are you," said Grinchard. "If it's not for you, I'd still be out cold." Near splitting snort ended the conversation, and they turned to see Ugub charging straight at Fungus. The traitorous brute would normally have stood a head shorter than the old leader, but with the bigger piglin's ruined leg, Ugub looked down on them now. Fungus braced himself for the impact, but Ugub lowered their skull and smashed it into Fungus's chin. The impact knocked Fungus flat over on the back. Ugub leapt on top of them, pressing their advantage. The rest of the piglins stood aside, none of them apparently clear on whom they should be rooting for. Farnham had no doubt that they would be cheerful for whoever emerged from the fight victorious, and they would pretend that they had been rooting for them the entire time. Meanwhile, they wouldn't interfere, satisfied to merely watch and enjoy seeing the two most powerful piglins around battle each other to the finish. What should we do? Grinchard asked. One of them is going to eventually win. Then they're going to come after us. Maybe they won't, Farnham said, with the hope he really feel. They were content to let us sit here before you escaped and before we woke up, Micro pointed out. Things have changed. There's no other way out of this pen. Grinchard glanced around, hoping to prove everyone else wrong. Not unless you have hiding a shovel somewhere, Farnham said. I mean, another shovel. The three of them glanced at one another and shook their heads. Once inside Farnham's quarters, Kritten turned the place upside down, looking for the diamond pickaxe that they coveted since the first official obsidian for animals deal that they had with Farnham. The obsidian had been crucial to their plans, of course. With it, you could build your own obsidian portals, from the nether to anywhere, then wanted Piglin forces to appear in the overworld. But the diamond pickaxe gave them control over these portals. Not only could they build them, but they also can shut them down. Bungus and Elgub was still, and all the rest of the Piglins might not have considered that angle, but Kritten had. And now was the time to part of the plan of the action. Now that Farnham would destroy all the Piglins stockpiled obsidian, Kritten knew that they couldn't just build a new obsidian portal to get back to the nether. There was only one way for them to return home, the obsidian portal in the back of the zoo, and the ruin that for them, the only one tool, the diamond pickaxe. Despite that, understanding not much of what Farnham and his friend Micro said about the pickaxe, Kritten found it quickly. It hadn't been hidden so much as tucked away. When the advisor picked it and hefted it in his hands, they felt compelled for a moment to admire it. Not for its amazing utility, but for its incredible beauty. A bellow from Bungus, but sharp and at the moment, and Kritten realized not much time left them before Elgub and the rest of the Piglins would come searching for the advisor. When that happened, the chance for the perfect escape would come to an end. So Kritten sprinted out of Farnham's home, straight for the obsidian portal, the diamond pickaxe firmly in their hand. They glanced over to see what was happening between Bungus and Elgub and saw that their old friend had been beaten flat into the ground. It would only be a matter of moments before Elgub finished him off. He could just make a run for it, Micro said. The gates have broken. We're not locked in anymore, and the Piglins seem pretty occupied with the big battle going on right now. As if to punctuate that statement, Fungus found an opening to poke Elgub in the eye, sending the brute squealing and clutching the injured orb. This is just the first good blow that Fungus had gotten in. It seemed like it might turn the tight tide. That was a cheap shot, Farnham said. It's a duel to the death, not a sparring match, Grinchard said. There's nothing such thing as cheating when your life's on the line. And probably not any other point for the Piglins, Micro pointed out. They don't seem to care much for the concept of honor. So, are we going to make a break for it or not? Farnham asked nervously. His legs were itching to run. But as battered as he was, he didn't know if he would outpace any of the Piglins on foot race. I say we stay here, Micro said. She wasn't looking at the others, though. A brutal fight taking place before them. She had her attention fully focused on something else happening beyond the big battle. We're not going to outrun them. More to the point, we're going to outrun that. What are you talking about? Farnham stepped over next to Micro and craned his neck to see what he gazed at. There in the distance, Kritten had emerged from Farnham's personal quarters, the part of the zoo's complex where regular visitors weren't allowed. Farnham had wondered where the little piglin had gone off after rousing Fungus and sending him back to battle Elgub. He wouldn't have blamed him if they simply stepped through the obsidian portal and disappeared into the nether forever. Apparently that was still part of Kritten's plan. That's exactly where they were heading. With all the other piglins focused on the titanic duel taking place before them, none of them had noticed Kritten moving off before, and they were even less likely to pay attention from them now. When Farnham saw why those piglins had made all the terrible mistake. Kritten has the diamond pickaxe, Micro nodded. The little traitor must have found it right where I told you it would be. They might not be able to speak our language, but I think they better handle an understanding than we might have guessed. What is that little piglin pal of yours going to do with it? Gringer said, it's still as groggily. Steal all the obsidian? Farnham chuckled at that. I destroyed all of that. There's no obsidian left. Other than what makes up the portal, Micro pointed out, one of the piglins on the far side of the battle finally spotted Kritten and gave a little piglin a mean stare. No matter who won the battle, it was clear like Kritten had run out of friends among their people. Hey, Farnham picked up a rock and tossed it at the staring piglin. I didn't hit them, but it came close enough to draw their attention. Hey, over here. The piglins glared at Farnham, but they didn't move a direction. They would have involved trying to skirt around the fight, which had drawn closer to the enclosure's gate. Farnham picked up another rock and threw it at the glaring piglin. This one caught them in the leg and elicited the high-pitched squeal of offense. That brought a smile to Farnham's face, but it evaporated. The rest of the piglins all turned to see what the problem was. When they did, they saw a glaring piglin hopping around on its injured leg, but they also looked past that one and saw Kritten sneaking off behind them. Even Elgub saw this and paused the beating of Fungus. Given another moment, the small piglin would have probably put permanent end to the larger one. But when they spotted Kritten skulking away, they moved themselves away from Fungus and started bowing at the little piglin. Kritten froze for an instant, perhaps hoping that all the commotion would possibly be focused on them, but that turned out to be pointless. An instant later, every one of the other piglins, besides Fungus, who was too battered to move, rushed to Kritten, snorting and screaming through their blood. "Run!" Farnham shouted. The sound of the zookeeper's voice shocked Kritten into action. They turned and fled away from the other piglins as fast as their little legs could carry them. "They're not going to make it very far," Grinchard guessed, "and they're not going to last very long if they get caught." "They might make it through the front gates of the zoo in time," Micro said. "After that, who knows? Maybe they can get lost in the dark." "They're not going for the gates," Farnham said. "What?" Farnham shook his head, but he never took his eye off Critten's progress toward their actual goal. "They're going for the obsidian portal." A moment later, Kritten plunged through the portal's field, swirling purple, and disappeared. Some of the piglins close to the portal slowed up, unsure if they should try to follow the little piglin back to the nether or not. "That's good, that going to do them," Grinchard said. "They're not any more likely to get away in the nether than they would here, right?" "You saw what they were carrying, right?" Farnham couldn't help but smile about it. "My most precious diamond pickaxe," Micro explained to Grinchard. Grinchard was mystified by now that Micro was taking a theft of her precious pickaxe. "And you're happy about that?" "About that? No. About what's happening next? If the little trader's fast enough, very much so." The rest of the piglins are close to the obsidian portal. A few more are almost close enough to touch it when the purple field of the swirling side stuttered and went out, leaving nothing inside it but air. The piglins all hauled up short, Ugub included. The brute began grunting out orders of some sort, trying to get the piglins to figure out a way to obsidian portal restarted. They fired arrows at it. They threw axes at it. They smashed it with whatever they could find. Nothing worked. The frame remained empty. Ugub snorted in absolute frustration, and the rest of the piglins, including even the half-conscious Fungus, joined in with them, raising a horrifying chorus of anguish. Chapter 30. To rule the Nether. Kritten's plans had worked out better than they could ever have hoped for when they first got banished from the Bastion. It had been bad enough that the Great Bungus had lost all faith in them, but the fact that they couldn't count anyone else in the Bastion stand up for the shatter of any other plans that they might have had. Then the advisor had left the Bastion. The only thing they hoped for had been to figure out a way to survive the night. What would have been enough accomplishment to start with? Now they realized that they could be in charge. No more being power behind the throne. They would sit in the throne themselves. How would they do that? The Piglin society people followed those who had power, mostly in physical variety. The larger you were, the better the chance you would be in charge and stay that way. It had never fit that mold, so now it was time to forge a new one. It never would have been possible if they had not been able to get rid of Bungus, Ugub, and all the rest of the Piglin warriors that stood behind them. And none of that would have been possible if Kritten had not met Farnham. The advisor smiled as they thought of the fateful encounter with the terrified zookeeper so far under the surface of the overworld. Both of them had been where they'd likely the lowest parts of their lives, but they'd risen a long way from there, or at least Kritten had. Farnham's fate would have been the problem, not theirs. They'd done everything they could to help him out, far more than any other Piglin would have dared. Of course, all of those actions had helped Kritten too. They had just been sharp enough to understand that all the time. The whole plan might have fallen apart if Kritten had ever showed Bungus or any of the other Piglins how to ignite the obsidian portal, or how to put one out. The moment they had entered the nether, Kritten had turned around and extinguished the portal, that they had destroyed the entire thing with a diamond pickaxe, one block of obsidian at a time. It didn't take long to remove one piece of it, ensuring the Piglins following them were trapped on the other side. Just in case someone on this side managed to find a stray piece of obsidian to help them rebuild the portal, though, Kritten kept chipping away at the frame until they destroyed the entire thing. Only then did they allow themselves a moment to sit down and catch their breath. They slumped against the spot where the obsidian portal's frame had just been, the diamond pickaxe in their lap, and they took a moment to collect their thoughts. Then they let out a wild whoop in triumph. Kritten had gone through the worst time of their life, and they had emerged victorious. Now nothing stood in their way. The advisor marched all the way back to the remains of the obsidian portal of the Great Bungus Bastion. When they got there, they walked through the front gate, tall and proud as they had ever been. The guards were goggled at Kritten, shocked to see them return without any other Piglin warriors leaders who had gone off to conquer the world. "What happened to them?" One of the guards finally dared to ask Kritten, and strode past them as they followed the advisor into the bastion and hear the answer. "They failed at their ambitions and were defeated. However, I was not." Both of the guards trailed after Kritten as they worked their way through the bastion to the throne room. Others who spotted them joined them, curious of what was going on. By the time the advisor made it to the throne room, they had full possession of the Piglins following in their wake. But no one to stop them, Kritten climbed on the Great Bungus' throne and sat down. They wiggled around the moment until they felt comfortable enough, then gazed at all the Piglins who had assembled there before them to see what was up. "The Great Bungus is dead," Kritten said, or at least close enough to it. They waited for a gasp of the crowd to die down, then spoke again. "Ugub, who betrayed the Great Bungus, is also dead, as are all those who went with them to the overworld. as it caused even more of the hubbub in the crowd remaining piglins, realizing how much the people they had lost. Not just their two most powerful leaders, but also the greatest of their warriors. What would happen to them all now? Kritten had a plan for that. I am now in charge here. I have tried the way of brute force, but simple muscle, and it has failed us. What we need are intelligence and strategy and wisdom. The kind of wisdom that can guide through the horrors of the stunning loss to help us aspire to even greater heights. One of the guards from the gate stood closest to Kritten, and they were brave enough to ask a question in the mind of so many other piglins in the room. Why should it be you who leads us? Kritten had anticipated this. They pulled out the diving pickaxe, struck a guard on the head with it. As the injured piglin reeled away, the advisor stood up in the center of the throne room and said, "Because I know the secrets of the overworld. I know how to get there. I know how to protect us there. And I know how to conquer it." The poor piglins, already shocked by the loss of so much of their people's strength, were cowed by Critten's declaration and showed their strength. They had never seen such an amazing weapon before, and were unsure how to stand up to it, much less the advisor holding it. When the other guard who had allowed Kritten to stroll into the bastion started up a chant, "Hail the great Kritten! Hail the great Kritten! Hail the great Kritten!" The other piglins close by joined in, and then more and more piglins, and soon the entire throne room. Then the entire bastion rang with the chants of every piglin around. "Hail the great Kritten! Hail the great Kritten! Hail the great Kritten!" The advisor, the ruler of the bastion, held their diamond pickaxe over their head in triumph, thrusting into the air every time the crowd called their name. As the bastion newly minted ruler, Kritten wasn't sure exactly how they'd manage to conquer the overworld, but they swore to themselves that they would dedicate every ounce of their smarts and their fellow piglin power to making that happen. One day, and someday soon, the overworld would tremble beneath their marching boots, and the creature who lived there would be chanting Critten's name too. Chapter 31. Last Chances. When Ubgub and the rest of the piglins were done squealing about Critten's utter and incredibly successful betrayal, they all turned their attention back towards Farnham and his friends. The rage had focused on something and seemed like the creatures trapped in the unused enclosure were doomed to serve that purpose. Ubgub returned to the gate, put their massive hands on the bars there, finally ready to tear off its hinges so that the brute and the rest of the piglins would storm into the pen and kill everyone in it. As Farnham gazed up at Ubgub, though, he saw not only the fury on the brute's face, but abject terror. The brute noticed that Farnham and recognized this in them, and Ubgub fell to one knee and struggled with anything trying to tremble in fear. Farnham let out alongside. "They're dead," he said to his friends. "Kritten just killed every one of them." "Are you sure?" Micro said, far more concerned that the three of them were about to be killed than the fate of their attackers. "They don't have any more of the potion with them here that allows them to survive outside the nether, and they have no way back to the nether before the potions they did take wear off. It's only a matter of time before they're all kneel over and die, just like the Hoglin did." Grinch swallowed. "And then return as zombies like that Hoglin did too. We can't just wait them out here," Micro said. "We don't want any zombified piglins wandering all over town." "We could just reignite the obsidian portal for them," Farnham said. "That would allow them to go back home. But then come back here and invade again whenever they like," said Grinch. "Don't you dare." "We're just lucky they hadn't been able to figure that out themselves," Micro said. "Otherwise, we'd already be dead." As a horror of notion grew in Farnham's heart, they realized there was another way. Maybe he could just needed to get Ubgub to listen to them. "I have an idea." He walked toward the gate and waved gently at Ubgub to get the brute's attention. "Please tell me you're not going to save them," Grinch said. "I don't know," Farnham said, "but I'm for sure not going to save them here." Ubgub spotted Farnham and responded by rattling the gate and getting loose a savage snort and hit the zookeeper like a hurricane-forced wind. Farnham didn't let it cow them. He couldn't afford that. "I know what Kritten did to you," Farnham shouted at the brute, hoping that they could figure out what he's saying. When Critten's name, the vicious glint of recognition flared in the brute's eyes. Farnham mimed himself of choking to death on poison and falling over. Under those circumstances, Ubgub might have been amused by such silliness, but the sight of the fate that time had been in store for the brute for the rest of the piglins instead plunged terror into their heart. Now that he had Ubgub's full attention, Farnham held up his hand and mimed an obsidian portal. Micro saw that he was doing and helpfully walked right through the imaginary doorway that Farnham had framed out. Then he got to the other side. She breathed easy and free. Ubgub grunted to Farnham and pointed at the empty frame of the obsidian portal that Kritten had left through. "There would be no escape through that." "True," Farnham said equably. "But there's not the only obsidian portal you know of, is it? There's another one out there." He arched his eyebrows and raised his voice as he mimed crawling underground and finding another obsidian portal, reacting with relief and delight. Then he returned to Ubgub for the kind of response he really hoped would be coming. The brute stared at him and blinked several times. It took Ubgub a long time, but they eventually got there. Farnham could see the spark of the idea finally catch fire in the brute's eyes. Ubgub cocked his head, as if they were thinking, and Farnham guessed he knew what the piglins were contemplating. Did the piglins here have enough time to make it to the other obsidian portal? One way, the one in the watery cave, or is it already too late? Farnham shrugged at the brute. "I don't know. But do you really have any other choice? It's either you give it a shot or die." He knew that the piglin couldn't understand his words, but he hoped the sentiment came across. Ugub let go of the gate and backed away from it, looking defeated but far from done. The brute gave Farnham a grim nod and pointed to the zookeeper, then to the exit of the zoo. Farnham's eyes grew wide as he realized the brute was trying to say to him, "They want me to lead him to the obsidian portal." "That sounds like an awful idea," Micro said. Grinch agreed. I can't think of any good reason why you would want to help save any of their lives after that they did to us and the rest of the town today." Micro grunted at that. "Well, there's always another option they have, which is to spend what time they have left trying to kill us all." Farnham chuckled with a low-key delivery. "Good point." He gazed up at Ugub and nodded. "I'll show you where it is." "Are you out of your mind?" Grinch glared at the zookeeper for the moment, then seemed to think they'd figured out something clever. "Are you really going to guide them to the obsidian portal, or are you just going to lead them out of the middle of nowhere?" "The thought had occurred to me," Farnham confessed as he walked through the gate. "It would be better than letting them run amok in town for sure. But yeah, I'm actually going to show them where the obsidian portal, or at least do a tunnel I dug that leads to it." Richard fell in line behind Farnham, as did Micro. "But why? You don't know what they do with that for you. Piglins never know mercy of any kind." Farnham led his friends right through the center of the Piglin warriors. None of the invaders seemed to have given a mean glare. They just bowed their heads and grunted softly as they passed by instead. "I'm not going to hold myself to their standards," Farnham explained. "I wouldn't have attacked their home either. Maybe this can teach them a lesson about kindness." "And if it doesn't," Micro asked, "then maybe it can teach me one instead." The others only could nod at that. Farnham glanced around at the zoo one last time to make sure he was ready to go. As he did, he spotted Fungus lying unconscious on the ground. "What about him?" Farnham said, pointing at the Piglin's former leader. Ugub sneered at the downed creature in disgust. Farnham wasn't about to abandon Fungus here, though. Not if he could help it. He led his friends over to Fungus and roused him. The ex-leader managed to get to their knees, but that's the best they could do. "They would never make it to the obsidian portal like this," Micro said, "and they're too big for the other Piglins to carry him. We can't just leave him out here," Grinchard said, then waved out the happy-looking Farnham gave him. "No, I mean, we can't let him just wander off through town, right?" Fungus had listened to all this, and they clearly knew what Farnham and his friends were talking about. Instead of insisting that they could take them along, the injured ex-leader crawled over the empty enclosure and shut the gate behind himself. "Can we really just let him leave in here like that?" Micro said. "Of course not," Farnham responded. "We need to seal them in." With no ceremony, Farnham sealed the gate, with what held up admirably even under Gub's most forceful efforts. While he did this, Micro hunted around for Farnham's iron shovel and found it. Miraculously, it was still intact. Fungus did not object to being sealed into the pen. They just waved Farnham off the moment the work had been done and collapsed in the softest bit of the ground they could find. "I think we're ready," Farnham said. He walked out of the front of the gate of the zoo. It lit a torch and began hiking into the darkness, where they had a long way to go. But he knew what time was short for the Piglins. He had no idea how short it might be. So if he could have run the entire way, he would have. He would have paced himself for sure. He was sure to collapse. "I don't think we're moving fast enough for Ugly Bub," Grinchard said, pointing the thumb back at Ugub. "You can see why we're eager to move faster," Farnham said as they trotted along. "But this is about the best pace I can maintain." Ugub strode forward with their long legs, scooped Farnham up before he could protest, and set the zookeeper on their shoulder. When they were set off at the blazing gate, staring at the rest of the group and keep up with them. As they went, Farnham guided Ugub by pointing out the proper path, and the brute immediately obeyed. Some of the Piglins fell away as they raced along, but Ugub refused to slow down for them. Myra and Grinchard stayed behind and those Piglins to take up the rear, prodding them to hustle along as they best they could. Eventually, they reached the top of the tunnel that Farnham made leading up the obsidian portal, as if he found the underground cave. He clapped Ugub on the shoulder and pointed at it. The brute set him down next to the open hole. Farnham pointed at Ugub and then the hole with the arms, as far as he was willing to lead the Piglins. Ugub had started to turn a little green by this point. Otherwise, they would want to argue that Farnham's decision instead. Ugub plunged into a hole, trying to race to the bottom of the tunnel before he could succumb to the illness. The rest of the Piglins followed after Ugub one by one, squealing and grunting as they went. Some of them knocked the others over in eagerness to escape, but they all kept moving until every one of them dived into the tunnel and disappeared. Farnham pointed at the hole to suggest something, but Micro was already on it. Using Farnham's iron shovel, she sealed off the tunnel, making sure that at this point none of the Piglins could change their mind. "I can't believe we did that," Grinchard said, shaking their head in disbelief. "What if they survive and come back to hurt us?" Farnham shrugged. "We know they're out there now. Next time we'll be ready for them." "Us and the rest of the town." He had no better answer. "They didn't look good anyhow," Micro pointed out. "That problem might solve itself. They might make it back to the Nether in time," Grinchard guessed, "but there's no way to be sure." Farnham agreed to that and sighed as he returned and began to lead his friend back home. "Hopefully we'll never have to find out." Dawn was breaking by the time the three of them got back to the town. The rest of the townsfolk were already out and about, cleaning up the mess the Piglins had made and tending to the injured. The invaders had done terrible amount of damage in the short time that they'd been there, rampaging about the place, but it seemed, to Farnham at least, that his neighbor had all survived. Farnham would have explained everything about what happened and his involvement in it, to the whole town at some point. But he wasn't quite able to tackle the duty right now. Instead, he led his friends back into the zoo, so that they could grab a much-needed rest. When he entered the place, he heard a horrible low moaning. It seemed to reverberate around the entire zoo. He suspected what it might be the moment it reached his ears. He headed to the enclosure where he and his friends had held prisoner to confirm it. Inside, he saw Fungus had succumbed to the poisoning that the overlord inflicted on the piglins who left the nether. Kritten's portion had protected them from what had torn off, although it was impossible for Farnham to tell when. He just knew that Fungus had known there was no more, but also that they were still moving around, making all the groaning. It was the biggest zombie piglin I've ever seen, Grinchard said. Their mouth was a weary twist. Micro nodded in agreement. Farnham hadn't seen nearly so many undead creatures like this, but he could probably agree that his well-traveled friends, Fungus was just as big now as they had been in life, exception of their burnt leg, of course. How is it that Fungus now seems a lot less threatening than they did when they were breathing, Grinchard says. For one, they're no longer trying to leave an invasion, Micro said. For two, they're just groaning now rather than bellowing at the top of their lungs. And three, they're trapped in an enclosure, right? Right? It took Farnham a moment to realize that Micro had asked him the question. Right? Right, he said. He built the thing to hold anything that might find, large zombies included. Grinchard just kept staring at the undead Fungus and shook their head. That's good to know, but what now? What do you mean? Micro gave him a good-natured elbow in the ribs. They mean, what are you going to do with them? Farnham's face broken and wide inside his mouth. Oh, that's easy. I'm keeping them. They're looking at the latest, greatest addition to the zoo. Wow. That was screwed up. So you're telling me this guy, who has not a lot of character development, granted, but it's just, wow, that's nuts. But yeah, that was a great book, honestly. It just means that we need to find out what we're reading next. And yep, in the end, he got a zoo animal. Anyways, I hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day. Be polite, be efficient, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Tomorrow, there's going to be the full version of the video. And then the day after that, we're going to find out what we're reading next. So, yep, hope you guys have a super fantastic, wonderful day, and I'll see you guys next time. Bye-bye.